Before working on your vehicle, always raise and secure it to the frame with properly rated jack stands or automotive hoist according to the vehicle manufacturer's recommendations and procedures. For safety, the installer and all vehicle drivers must review the complete set of print version installation instructions and heed all the included cautions and warnings. Today, we're working on a 2014 Ford F150 and we'll be installing a 2-inch front strut spacer lift kit. Most Mostro suspension spacer lift kits install similarly, with premium components designed specifically for your make, model, and generation of vehicle. Follow these instructions as a general guide and defer to the vehicle manufacturer's recommended procedures and torque specifications when applicable. Using the manufacturer's recommended procedure, support the vehicle's frame with jack stands or frame contact lift. Raise the front of the vehicle so that the front wheels are off the ground. Remove the front wheels. Loosen and unscrew the outer tie rod nut, but leave it attached with several threads. This will protect it during the next step. Using a short, sledge-type hammer, firmly and squarely strike the leading edge of the steering knuckle where the tie rod end is attached. It may take several strikes to break the tie rod taper loose. Be careful not to strike the tie rod end or the tie rod nut at any time. If the tie rod does not become loose after repeated attempts, try again with a larger hammer. Once the tie rod end taper has been separated, unscrew and remove the tie rod nut, allowing the tie rod to become detached from the steering knuckle completely. Detach the upper sway bar link end from the sway bar end. Unbolt and unclip any brake hoses and wires from the steering knuckle. Do not disconnect the flexible brake line ends from the brake caliper or the hard line at the frame. Pushing the pads in very slightly now will help in later steps. Remove the brake caliper and pad holder assembly. Hang the brake caliper and pad holder assembly up onto the frame by a strong caliper hook, heavy wire, or straps. If the rotors are rusted, they may need a little heat application to help break the rotor free of the knuckle. Be mindful and cautious while working around heated metal. Once safe to handle, remove the rotors. Detach the wheel speed sensor. Let it hang back, away from the steering knuckle. Loosen and break the taper of the upper and lower ball joint using the same technique as described for the tie rod end. Remove the upper ball joint nut, but leave the lower ball joint nut attached with a few threads at this time. Lift the upper control arm and ball joint out of the steering knuckle. Now remove the lower ball joint nut to remove the steering knuckle from the vehicle. Unbolt the lower strut mount. Unbolt the upper strut mount. Remove the strut assembly by pressing down on the lower control arm as much as necessary to make clearance. Inspect kit for proper hardware quantity. Note that the copper kit nuts will only fit on the spacer's attachment studs and not on the stock strut. Attach the upper strut mount spacers to the stock strut using the factory strut mount nuts. Torque to the factory recommended specifications or aftermarket brands, if equipped. It will be necessary to swap the driver and passenger side struts to the opposite side, as they now will have a mirrored upper stud pattern. Alternatively, if a side-to-side swap is not desired, the strut assemblies can be mounted into a dedicated strut compressor so the upper seats can be rotated 180 degrees. It will be helpful to rotate the lower mount stud angle out a few degrees. This can be done in a vise, or by setting the lower mount into the lower control arm and pulling the strut assembly outwards. Install the strut assembly by pressing down on the lower control arm as much as necessary to make clearance. Install and tighten the newly supplied upper strut mount nuts. Final torque of 36 foot-pounds. Install and torque the lower strut mount nuts to the factory recommended specifications or aftermarket brand specifications if equipped. Install the steering knuckle to the lower ball joint. Screw on the lower ball joint nut with a few threads. Install the upper ball joint by pressing up into the upper control arm so that the upper ball joint can be connected. Then, install the upper ball joint nut and torque to the factory recommended specifications, or aftermarket brands, if equipped. Torque the lower ball joint nut to the factory or aftermarket brand's specifications. Next, install the wheel speed sensor and torque to the factory recommended specifications, or aftermarket brands, if equipped. Install the brake rotor. Attach the brake caliper and pad holder assembly onto the steering knuckle. Torque to the factory or aftermarket brand's recommended specifications. Connect all attaching points for all brake hoses and wires to the steering knuckle and torque to the factory recommended specifications, or aftermarket brands, if equipped. Attach the upper sway bar link end to the sway bar end. Torque to the factory or aftermarket brand's recommended specifications. Attach the outer tie rod to the steering knuckle. Torque to the factory recommended specifications, or aftermarket brand specifications. Install the front wheel. Torque to the factory or aftermarket brand's recommended specifications. Repeat the entire process for the other side of the vehicle. Remove all jack stands and lower vehicle to the ground. Before test driving, check for the proper function of the emergency brake and brake pedal. If there is any difference from their safe function, you must inspect, diagnose, and fix any issues before proceeding. Once the vehicle has been inspected and tested for safe brake function, it can be test-driven cautiously. Slow initial starts and stops should be attempted before progressing to the test drive. If there is any unusual noises or sensations while starting, stopping, or turning, you must terminate the test immediately to inspect, diagnose, and fix any issues. Since Mostro is prefabricated for the installer's ease and the end user's peace of mind, Mostro products are vehicle-specific. Consult our website at nationaldrivetrain.com for vehicle compatibilities. Got questions? Planning a build and need help? Call, email, or comment below. We'd be happy to help.